table this morning and over here on the easel. This artwork was all produced out of our own South Main art room. Two of the pieces, this one here and this one here, were done by our own Pat Schewel, sitting right over there. And the middle piece of the young girl in dancing was done by Donna Shiflett, who's a friend of ours. And that piece was Donna's first attempt at painting. So I wish she was here today. I should have told her I was going to be featuring part of her work here today. But I thought all of this artwork reflected on our scripture from today. And you'll figure out why in just a moment. Where to sit. You know, that seems to be a prominent issue and factor in many areas of our lives. Where to sit. I know it's an important issue at church, isn't it? Yeah. Where to sit. You know, church, except for here, y'all, some of you are a little strange, okay? Because in every other church I've ever served, nobody ever wanted to sit at the front. There was always a competition for the back.
Right about that.
Now, I'm not sure why that is, and you back row sitters probably have your own reasons for wanting to sit in the back. Maybe you once had a bad experience where a preacher spit on you, so you didn't want to get too close to the front. Maybe you don't trust the people who sit behind you. Maybe you're afraid they will talk about you behind your back if you sat in front of them. Now, I would never be so cynical as to suggest that back row sinners want to be able to talk about the people who sit in front of them. My hunch is that a big reason folks sit where they sit is a matter of habit. That's where you maybe have sat for a long time, and it's just easier to sit in the same place each Sunday and not have to make another decision, right? Okay, where do you want to sit? Well, I don't care. Where do you want to sit? I don't care. You sit. You know, Gene and I do that all the time. Well, what do you want to have for supper? I don't know. What do you want to have? Would you just make a decision and decide? I have a hunch that's more the reason. And I understand, I too get tired of making decisions. And so having a routine relieves us of another decision. But in most places other than church or maybe school, the prime seats are not in the back, are they? I mean, if you go over to the Bon Secours Center in Greenville for a concert, or the Peace Center for a play, they don't call the seats at the back the premium seats, do they? No. With the premium price. No, the closer to the front you are, the more you pay. Yep. Right? And if you go over to Tiger Stadium on a Saturday, Death Valley, and then you're one of those ZipTay members, you have paid top dollar for the seats down low, right? Close to the field. And the cheaper seats are up in the rafters in that nosebleed section where the players look like little insects running on the field. The reason when we go places like concerts or football games or other public events where sitting is involved, the reason the ticket usually gives you an assigned seat is because there is competition for seats, right? Can you imagine a Clemson football game if they just opened the doors and said, go in and find the seat wherever you want to sit? Festival seating, we call that. there would be deaths by stampede, would it not? In fact, there have been events in the past where such tragedies occurred. I was in high school at my hometown in Indiana, not far from Cincinnati, Ohio, when in 1979, 13 persons were killed at a concert with festival seating for the rock band The Who at Riverfront Coliseum. The doors were opened, the crowds pushed and shoved, trying to get first to the best seat, and in the process, 13 people trampled to death. The next week, the Cincinnati City Council passed a law to ban festival seating at large public events. I've gotten really good seats a few times in my life. In the year 2000, that year didn't start out so good for Jean and I. She was diagnosed with cancer in March and spent 40 days in the hospital, a few months of treatment. But that fall, in celebration of her finishing her treatment, we took what we had always dreamed of, our dream trip, and we went to New York City. And for years, we've been fans of the David Letterman show. Did you ever watch it?
Yep.
So I went to the website of David Letterman's show, and I learned that there was a 2-year waiting list for securing tickets to have a seat in the studio audience. But they had a drawing. A contest you could enter online to win tickets for the show. And so I entered and about 3 weeks before we were to go on the trip, and on the Monday night, before we were leaving on Thursday morning for the trip, Jean answered the telephone, and it was someone from the David Letterman show, and she had to answer a trivia question, which she did correctly, and we won 2 tickets to the show. We were instructed to show up at the Ed Sullivan Theater 2 hours before the start of the show's taping on that Thursday, which we did, and we got in line with all the other hundreds of people who were waiting to get into the show. And about an hour before taping time, they opened the building, and we snaked our way through the lobby in those kind of lines that they have at Six Flags, where you twist back and forth, until finally they let us into the auditorium of the theater. And when we hit those doors, and the ticket didn't give you an assigned seat, when we hit the doors, Jean grabbed my hand, and she said, "Follow me." And with one swift yank, she pulled me along, walking faster than I had ever known her to walk, until we made our way to 2 seats right on the aisle, 4 rows from the front. And when David Letterman came out in the audience to do his Guess Your Cuts of Meat, remember that gig? He stood right next to Jean. Those were good seats, good seats. Unlike the $85 a ticket we paid to get seats at Phantom of the Opera, and that was back in 2000, a lot more than that now, I'm sure, where we sat under the balcony overhang with a pole right in front of us. Never did get to see all that impressive action that was happening above. The other time I really got a good seat was back in the early 1990s. I was a hospital chaplain in northern Kentucky, and the auxiliary of the hospital system had a spring luncheon at a country club, and the invited guest speaker was Nick Clooney, father of George Clooney, brother of Rosemary Clooney. Nick was a local news broadcaster in the Cincinnati area, and at the luncheon, where I was on the program to deliver the blessing for the meal, I got to sit between George Clooney's mother and father. Very nice people, by the way. Have you ever really gotten a really good seat? Have you ever had a really bad seat? Where we sit sometimes means a whole lot more than just where we sit. What our view is. Seating can be a social standing issue as well. Seating can be a statement or matter of justice. One of the defining moments in the struggle for civil rights in this nation came when a little 95-pound woman from Alabama named Rosa Parks refused to give up her front seat on the bus, the city bus. Because you see, the standards of society at that place and time, and even the law said, and the powers that be in the community established, that there were front seat people and there were back seat people. And she was told she was a back seat person because of the color of her skin. Now, we have come a long way in erasing that kind of ridiculous expectation in our world, but we've not come all the way yet. There's still some in our country who think that because one's skin color is darker, that there are certain seats those persons should not occupy. Where do I sit? That's not the only question which sometimes concern folks, but equally important to people sometimes is, where does everybody else sit? How does my seat compare to your seat? I mean, if I'm going to be somebody, if I'm going to have something to show for myself, if I am going to be able to grab hold of my piece of the pie, it matters where I sit. And if I sit too far down the line or the table, the best piece of the pie is going to be gone before I get mine. That's just the way it is. That's the way the world works. It's also a matter of who I sit. Who do I get to sit next to? The mayor, the governor, the teacher, the preacher. Got to make those connections. And indeed, sometimes that is important. Jesus and his disciples are traveling through Galilee on their way to Capernaum. And the disciples, like children in the back seat of the car on a long trip, have been arguing. Gene and I know about that. He's touching me. The dog's slobbering on me. They got to where they're headed, the disciples, and at dinner time, Jesus asked the question, what were you arguing about on the way? I can imagine no one wanted to answer the question honestly, especially since Jesus probably already knew the answer. Who wants to admit that they really care about status and position? It's embarrassing to admit that it's important to us, or that we engage in petty competitions of trying to best ourselves by one-upping somebody else, or that we're even trying to keep up with the Joneses or whoever, whatever name we fill in. None of the disciples speak up to admit their little greatest disciples of all competition. And in another gospel story, you may recall James and John, two of Jesus' disciples, who had been nicknamed the Sons of Thunder, if that says anything about them. They're much more upfront about their ambition. They want to have a seat on the right and on the left side of Jesus in the kingdom, and they ask him for it. They're above board about their desire to climb up the corporate ladder, so to speak, to the place of perceived power. They're open about where they want to sit. But in this story, none of the disciples want to admit. And there's only silence. So Jesus answers the question no one else will address. He uses this as an opportunity to redefine greatness or success. He does what he so frequently does in the Gospels. He pulls a reversal. He turns everything upside down. One summer, when I was a very young minister, a few years ago, still in seminary, I taught a primary age vacation Bible school class. Did y'all ever go to vacation Bible school?
Yeah.
You know, primary age, that's the first, second, and third graders, right? And the scripture lesson, one of the scripture lessons that week was this particular passage of Scripture. And on this particular day, when 10 or 12 6, 7, and 8-year-olds were lining up single file to go downstairs for refreshment time. You know, BBS, remember the little cookies and the green Kool-Aid? That's very important. Refreshment time, and they were doing their usual pushing and shoving and jockeying and arguing to see who would get to go in the front of the line, right? So it was important to be in the front of the line, headed toward the door. And when they had finished all of that, and had settled down, I asked them all to turn around where they were at. And I walked to what had once been the back of the line, but now was the front of the line. And I said, follow me. Well, the ones who pushed their way to what they thought was going to be the front of the line, they grumbled about how unfair all of this was. And their grumbling reminded me to this day of angry expressions so often voiced by any efforts to open opportunity and level the playing field or reverse the fortunes of those who often find themselves at the back of the line. Oh, no, we can't afford to pay that McDonald's worker more than minimum wage. Might put that big corporation out of business if they had to make $10 or $12 or $15 an hour. Huh? You hear that kind of talk? Jesus calls a child into the presence of his disciples, and he offers them another view of life. A version of reality that says the key to having deep joy in your life is serving, giving oneself to somebody else. You see, in Jesus' version of reality, the pecking order rules of the world get turned upside down. And to make his point, he calls this child right into the midst of them, right into the middle of their who's the greatest argument. And he takes the child into his arms and he says, now in God's world, let me introduce you to the major stockholder. In God's world, let me tell you who you should be falling all over yourselves to welcome. In God's world, let me set you straight on who has top billing. Put away all your previous assumptions about who is important and who has controlling interests and who you need to impress. Put that all away and focus your attention right here in my arms on this little child. Whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not only me, but the Father God Almighty who sent me. A child. You see, in Jesus' world of that day, children were at the very bottom of the social ladder. Children had no rights, no voice. They were property to be owned. There were children, women, men. Children were the last ones to be welcomed into places of power and authority, and Jesus says, no, that's to whom the kingdom of God belongs. Now, Jesus was not, I don't think, advocating that we let children run the household. That does sometimes happen, right? To disastrous consequences. But I think Jesus was challenging the prejudiced preconceptions about how power should be held in the world. One writer in this passage says, to welcome a child is to extend the simplest acts to an individual that society normally dismisses as perhaps cute, but ultimately insignificant. someone who entirely lacks any accomplishments or